So it is 8:30. I see a lot of people are starting to jump on now. We've got 83 participants. This is really great turnout. You know, I think just to start out as people are coming on, just a really quick acknowledgement and thanks to the Bank of Prairie du Sac for sponsoring this event. Um, the bank does this every single year in Sauk Prairie. But being that we are not allowed to meet in person, it would have had to been virtual anyways. And so Tawana from the Sauk Prairie Chamber reached out to the bank to ask if they would be open to sponsoring the event for the county as a whole, and they were gracious enough to do so. So I really appreciate them hosting every year, and then especially this year for opening this up to the county. It's a really great thing, and it's going to be very beneficial for us. I also want to take a moment to thank all the chamber directors, Tawana German from Sauk Prairie, Julie Jensen from Spring Green, Darren Hornby from Baraboo, and Christine Koenigke from Reedsburg. The real reason that we're here is because of those four directors. Since last March, we've been working very closely together, sharing our resources, meeting on a regular basis to really understand what we can do as a team to support our businesses. That started off with a small business grants last March. We raised upwards of, I think, around $175,000 within a 3-week time period. We were able to give those grants out to somewhere around 225 businesses. And that was at a time when there was a lot more uncertainty than there is now. And we kind of had this idea that, by springtime or by summer, things will kind of start to get back to normal. We know that hasn't happened. So after the grant program, we worked together. At that time, SCDC came in and we worked on reopening strategies. We worked with our health department then. We launched a couple initiatives that, thought were a great idea, and there was a lot of purpose behind them and excitement, but what's happened with COVID is it's just been so unpredictable. So some things have been really great successes, others have been helpful, but maybe not as much. And the idea for this event came out about 6 months ago. So there's been a lot of work involved, a lot of time, and we're excited that it is finally here. A few other people to introduce as well. We have Ed White from SCDC. As I just mentioned, has been super helpful working with the county on a number of initiatives, not just exclusively COVID, housing studies, employee retention and attraction, but has also been really helpful in kind of helping to navigate through the pandemic. Also from the county, we have Brent Miller. Brent is our new administrator. He started here about 3 months ago, and he will give a quick kind of vision for how he sees us moving forward. Tim McCumber, our county board chair, is also on. And then also from the state, our partners at WEDC, we have Jason Scott. WEDC has been a really great partner in the past. They've been incredibly helpful, helping to organize this event and kind of move us forward in the right direction. They also recently launched a new operation for rural prosperity. So we'll definitely get to be closer partners with them moving forward. And also Jeff Westra from the Workforce Development Board. WDB has been an awesome partner. They've had a number of activities in the last few months, drive-through job fairs, virtual events, really helping to place local residents to the jobs that are out there and helping our businesses fill those because there are some sectors, manufacturing in particular, that's still looking for a ton of workers. So with that, kind of how this program is going to work, we have Dr. Stephen Deller, who is going to give a presentation on kind of the trends that have happened over the last few months and kind of a forecast moving forward. Dr. Deller is a professor of economics from the University of Wisconsin, and he gives this presentation to the Sauk Prairie area on an annual basis. So we're very fortunate to have him kind of give us an overview of Sauk County as a whole. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go kick it off to Brent Miller. Brent, again, is our administrator. He's going to give a quick overview of his vision. We'll go then to Dr. Deller's presentation. From there, we have 8 breakout rooms, and you guys have all been pre-assigned based on your industries, and we will kind of go into a more open discussion. The moderators will introduce everybody just for time's sake, and then we have a few scripted questions, but we have a half hour, so there's plenty of time to really get your thoughts, questions out there. After the breakout session, we'll all come back as a group, and the moderators will then kind of report out the themes, concerns, and any questions that came up for either Dr. Deller, any of the chamber directors, or our state partners to help answer. So with that, I will pass it off to Brent Miller.
Thanks, Jared. Good morning, all. I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Sauk County Business Summit. As Jared said, my name is Brent Miller, and I'm the new administrator for Sauk County. I started with the county in October of 2020, and I do want to thank all those who worked so hard to put this business summit on. I know Jared has been stressed out about making sure that the breakout sessions work and everything like that, and I know it will because he does an exceptional job. When Jared asked me to do this welcome for the summit, I gladly accepted. Growing a business or developing new businesses, that really excites me. When I interviewed for the administrator position back in September, one of the questions that I was asked was, why do you want to come to Sauk County? My response was from my heart and was actually very easy. I wanted to come to Sauk County because of specific things. The economic development potential for Sauk County is huge, along with the availability of natural resources such as hiking, biking, kayaking, hunting, and fishing, etc. In my opinion, they are the perfect pairing. Grow and or develop a business while renewing and refreshing oneself at the same time. I believe that we are beginning to just tap the potential of economic development available in Sauk County. Whether that is growing a business or expanding it or developing a new business and tying that in with the natural resources that people love to use, see, and visit. This will assist this county in attracting employees and customers to this hidden gem called Sauk County. Since COVID-19, we've seen the numbers of staff that are able to work from home and have to work from home, and we found that we need to have a broadband system that will handle those requirements. Out of this horrible thing called COVID-19, it has truly opened the door in this county. I'm excited about the broadband grants and monies that have been allocated to several companies in this county to help expand broadband. This will only help us in our business expansion through better internet at the company level or with the employees that may continue to work from home, thus reducing overhead cost. Either way, it is a benefit to the business and to the county as a whole. When a business is just starting or growing and expanding, it affects more than just that business. My uncle owned a Dairy Queen in Madison, South Dakota. My cousin owns it now as my uncle has passed away. He was the president of a local business leaders group. Several businesses decided they would do a non-scientific study, community study, and pay their employees in cash, and then track the bills in that community. On average, those bills changed hands 23 times. This just demonstrates that a business starting, growing, or expanding has an impact not only on the suppliers, the consumers, and the employees, but on the gas station, the grocery stores, the movie theater, or the Dairy Queen and the community as a whole. My vision for Sauk County is to do what we can, to really tap what draws people here and to expand on our economic development to grow that business, grow the community, grow the county. I'm looking forward to hearing Dr. Deller talk about economic growth and development, followed by the breakout session information and discussions that will all help us grow and develop our community as a whole. Thank you for your time and enjoy the summit. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. I appreciate that. Before moving to Dr. Deller, just one thing I forgot to mention was that, so we have, right now there's 124 people participating in this event. Our goal is to host industry-specific roundtable discussions on a regular basis after today. So we'll talk about that more in the breakout groups. And those groups will be the industry kind of roundtables moving forward. But again, the idea is to continue moving this conversation forward so that we can kind of connect local resources, whether it's resources you guys have as individuals and businesses, or it's resources that the county has, our chamber, SEDC, or even the state. So this will be an ongoing discussion. And we really look forward to the insights gained from today and how that can help transform and inform us moving forward. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Dr. Deller for his presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Let me start the show here. There we go. I always enjoy when Jenny Erickson, who's in the UW Extension County office, gives me a call and says, hey, we got something going on in Sauk County. Can you help? I enjoy those calls because I think one of the things that makes Sauk County so vibrant is the ability of the different communities to work together. I think that's really important. You can have your friendly rivalries like, you're our arch enemy in basketball and whatnot. But when it comes to economic development and community development, you work together on a fairly regular basis. And I think that's really a very positive thing going for Sauk County, and I applaud you on that. The state of the current regional economy is a bit chaotic. And one of the things that I want to try to emphasize is going to be a reoccurring theme that I'm going to try to say again and again, is that the COVID recession has had a very disproportionate impact on people and businesses. There are some folks that it's an inconvenience, but they're sliding through quite well. There's a large number of folks that are being disproportionately hit hard by this. I just read in the newspaper the other day that the car sales for last year, there was a spike in the number of sales for high-end cars. For the first time ever, the average price of a new car sale was over $50,000. What that is essentially is that higher income folks are doing fine through this, but it's the lower income, the working poor, that is getting disproportionately hit. And I think that you can kind of see that through what's happening with the stock market right now. There's a real disproportion there. Okay, so really kind of two parts to the talk this morning. One is COVID-19 and the original economy, the very definition of what a roller coaster looks like, and notions of economic uncertainty. This is something that I keep coming back to again and again, how uncertainty in terms of what's happening really is a major driver of the economy. And then kind of close up with some discussion about near-term economic outlooks. Have you heard the one about the economist with the dartboard? Because that's kind of where we're at with how we think we're going to be coming out of this. We haven't experienced anything like this pandemic and the impact on the economy since the flu of 1918. That was 100 years ago. And the economy is so fundamentally different now than 100 years ago that some of the lessons learned from the flu of 1918 are difficult to follow. But the one thing that you have to kind of follow, I mean, what's driving a lot of this is infection rates and particularly death rates. This is for the Wisconsin. And you can see that, look back when the pandemic first hit, late spring, summer, the infection rate and particularly the death rate was fairly modest. And all of a sudden, through October, November, and kind of coming out of December, we just hit really hard. Now, there's two things here. One is a lot of the data that we're going to talk about goes up to November. Maybe coming into December, there's a bit of a lag here. So a lot of that bump, that kind of November bump in COVID, that's not reflected in the data yet. So we have a little bit of speculation here. But one of the things that the research is suggesting is that it's not necessarily the infection rate, it's the death rates, which is that kind of greenish color line. That's what people are responding to. They're responding not to the infection rates, but they're responding to the death rates. Maybe it's human nature. I'm not sure. I'm an economist, not a psychologist. But the risk of getting the flu, that's an inconvenience. We've all had the flu in the past, but the risk of dying from it, people respond differently to that. If you look at Sauk County, you see a very similar type of pattern. The death rate isn't as high as the state. I think that's a reflection of the demographics. But notice that Sauk County is following the same pattern here. Now, the idea is that as the vaccine gets rolled out, though the current rollout is somewhat disappointing, as the vaccine gets rolled out, I think that this infection rate is going to continue to decline, and hopefully the death rate starts to decline after it. A lot of this is going to hinge on how fast we can get the vaccine rate out, but it's the death rate there that we want to be looking at. Okay. Now, this is the unemployment rate for the U.S., Wisconsin, Columbia, Dane County, and Sauk County. And you can see that through 2017, 2018, 2019, pretty stable. You see little ups and downs, but pretty stable unemployment rate until all of a sudden the pandemic hit us. And we almost went into a panic mode. And we kind of shut down immediately. Okay. Now, notice that after that initial shock, we started to recover. Sauk County is not quite back to where it was in terms of unemployment, but it's getting pretty close to where it was in terms of unemployment. So overall, it looks as though we kind of have adjusted to living with the pandemic. Now, notice that this only goes up to November. We don't have December yet. Now, that spike, that COVID spike that was going through November and December, though, how that's going to play out on the economy, we haven't really captured that yet. Okay. Now, this is employment growth. Again, 2018, 2019, that whole time period, you kind of see, fairly stable. The U.S. is growing a little bit faster than Wisconsin. That's kind of normal. And then all of a sudden, you see a plummet, kind of a 1 month, this drop off the shelf. And then we start to see a little bit of a recovery. We see Wisconsin kind of drop down a little bit there. That's partially, you get these ups and downs, and you can read too much into that little tick down in October and November. But notice that there's just this drop off and then a slow recovery. We're not back to where we were, but we're moving in the right direction. The problem is we don't know what December and January look like yet. That spike that we're going through now, we haven't seen how that has played out yet. Okay. Now, I think this is going to be a reoccurring theme. Notice that not all industries, and again, this is for the state of Wisconsin, not all industries have been affected the same. Construction, for example, that's that black line there. It was hit a little bit, but it bounced right back. Okay. The construction industry has kind of learned how to deal with this. Now, not all construction has come back exactly the same, because some people's like, hey, I was going to have my kitchen remodeled. I really don't want those workers in my house. Okay, so you have a little bit of a play out in COVID, but generally the construction industry's come right back. Look at the finance sector. It wasn't even hit at all. Okay, it just a little bit of a blip there, but it's basically come back. Retail took a bit of a hit. It's basically come back, not quite to where it was, but it's come back. But accommodation and food services and arts and entertainment, those are the ones that have been hit and are having a hard time coming back. And this is going to be a reoccurring pattern. This is the same data, but it's just kind of zeroed in on a more recent time period there. And you can kind of see how some sectors are being affected much more than other sectors. And a lot of this, you can kind of look at how much does the business depend on consumer foot traffic. okay? The more the industry depends on foot traffic, the more it's going to be hit. Now, that's recreation, that's tourism, that's restaurants, that's hotels. People are adapting, they're adjusting, but not to the same level that they were. Okay, now what's driving a lot of this is that death rate. People are simply saying, I just don't, I would prefer not. I'm going to come back to that again in a little bit. Okay, now this is tracktherecovery.org. This is a website that's put together by Harvard University and Brown University, and it is just a wonderful site for tracking the recovery. Now, this particular chart, this is Wisconsin, okay? Unfortunately, we don't have this kind of detailed data for individual counties such as Sauk. We do for some of the larger metro areas like Chicago, but not for counties. So, but I think that Sauk County is following the same kind of pattern as Wisconsin overall. Now, what they've done here is they've grouped employment into three categories: high wage, middle wage, low wage. Look at the difference here between high wage and low wage, okay? This is the difference between a disproportionate impact on how COVID is playing out. A lot of those low wage workers, what we would sometimes refer to as the working poor, those are the folks that tend to be in the accommodations industry, the restaurant industry, recreational related industries. They're the ones that are getting hit disproportionately. Higher income workers, they're not getting hit just as hard. Now, notice a little downtick there. This is October 22nd, is a little bit of a downtick there. That's that last wave is starting to work its way into the data. When this data is updated, every other week it's updated. If we see this, I think we're going to continue to say employment across the board decline because of that wave that we're in right now that we're starting to come out of. I don't think we're going to go back to that shock of April, because I think we've kind of, there was tremendous uncertainty back in April. When this thing first hit, we didn't know what was going on. So there was almost like a panic mode. Okay, I don't think we're going to go back into a panic, but I think we're going to see that latest spike put downward pressure on employment, particularly low wage employment. Okay, this is the employment change for Sauk County. Again, you can see the initial shock when the pandemic first hit. We came back, we recovered, we kind of learned how to work with the pandemic. But yet you can see that second wave is starting to affect the economy. It's starting to pull us down. We're not down that much over January of 2020, but you can see that trend, that most current trend, is kind of moving in the wrong direction. And I think that's a reflection of this recent rate wave that we just went into. Now, consumer spending. Where are people spending their money? This again is Wisconsin. And I always get a chuckle out of grocery stores. Look at grocery store sales when the pandemic first hit. Okay, there were stories about people going out and hoarding toilet paper. I think that's part of what was happening, is that there was a short-term panic and people rushed to the grocery stores and basically stocked up. Okay, now there's another thing. That was the initial kind of panic reaction to the pandemic. I think the other thing that is coming out here now is that notice that grocery sales are consistently above average. Historically, they're above average. And the reason for that is that more and more people are eating at home. They're cooking at home. I think part of that spike when the pandemic first hit is a lot of folks realized, geez, I need to restock my pantry because I generally eat out a lot. And they need to, and there's sociological studies coming out about how families that are now eating at home more, how is that playing out in the family dynamics? But look at restaurants and hotels. It's down. See a little bit of a recovery there, but it's there. It's trending down a little bit. Entertainment and recreation has been hit really, really hard. People are simply not going out. They're not going out. Shows are canceled. And it's many of the music venues, for example, that are in Madison are just getting hit really, really hard by this. Some of the music venues that might be in the Wisconsin Dells area, they're also probably getting hit very, very hard. So there's a disproportionate. Now, if you look at what's the wage or the occupational mix of people that work in entertainment and recreation and restaurants and hotels, that's where a lot of those lower income workers are located, and they're taking a disproportionate hit there. Okay. Wisconsin consumer all spending, retail is actually up a little bit. Healthcare is down. The reason that healthcare is down is that a lot of elective procedures are being postponed or delayed. So that kind of procedure that you wanted to have done is like, well, I'm just going to put it off. So a lot of that type of stuff is playing out in the healthcare sector. Transportation, the airlines industry is getting hammered by the pandemic. It's just people are simply not traveling the way they used to, and if they are traveling, they're traveling by car. Okay. Consumer spending, this is Sauk County. We don't have the detailed industry by industry. You kind of see the initial panic when the pandemic first came out. We've kind of come back a little bit. Much of that is in grocery sales, that type of activity. But we're seeing that we're actually kind of doing okay here in terms of consumer spending. It's the mix. It's where the consumers are spending their money. They're shifting from one type of spending into another type of spending, and that's impacting labor in disproportionate ways. Okay. Now, small business revenues. Small business revenues took, again, a nosedive when the pandemic first hit, a bit of a recovery, and then it's flattened out. It's trending downward ever so slightly. A lot of the businesses that are restaurants, many restaurants are small businesses. Many accommodations are, unless they're part of a chain, are small businesses. Arts and recreation type businesses tend to be small businesses. A lot of small businesses are dependent upon that foot traffic, and they're taking a disproportionate hit. Okay. This is for Sauk County. That previous slide was for Wisconsin. Sauk County following very much the same type of pattern. You can see the blips up and down. I wouldn't read too much into those blips up and down. I'd be looking at the general trends. And you can see that small businesses are kind of taking it on the chin right now. This is why a lot of the CARES Act was really aimed at helping small businesses. You heard stories of large corporations taking out these loans. I think the Biden administration coming in has made a concerted, they're making a very strong statement that any kind of recovery, another wave of recovery aimed at businesses is going to be aimed at the smaller businesses. And this is the kind of information that they're looking at when they're saying, we're going to focus on the smaller businesses. Now we can get into a discussion about what is a small business. I think of a small business as, less than 20 employees, less than 10 employees. If you go to the business school on the Madison campus here, they think anything less than 500 is a small business. So we can get into a discussion of what we mean by a small business. But I think that when you look at the business structure across Sauk County, you'll find that the vast majority kind of are small, medium-sized businesses. And they're the ones that are kind of got pushed to the side, if you will, with the first CARES Act. And I think any kind of future stimulus is going to be aimed at these kind of businesses. Now, this to me is fairly important because small business openings, new business openings is the lifeblood of the economy. I've shared with the group before about how if we look at existing businesses and we look at existing businesses adding jobs and shutting jobs, existing businesses tend to be a net job loser. Existing businesses tend to shut more jobs than they add. Where we generate employment is new business startups. Okay, this is fundamental to the economy. The slowdown in the startup of new businesses and again, this is Wisconsin here, this is a concern for me, okay? If we don't start to see this rebound come late spring, summertime, I think that we're going to have a very slow recovery. The same exact pattern for Sauk County. I think we need to, as we start to come out of the pandemic recession, I think we need to kind of focus on these small businesses and helping these small businesses. One, the existing ones, and then trying to get people reopening and coming back online. Now, this is something that, this is a big brother watching almost. It gives you that kind of feeling. This is the percent change in time spent outside of the home. Where they get this information is they're tracking cell phones. So when you have your GPS turned on your cell phone, they're tracking you. They know where you're at. And this is the age of big data. And what they're able to do is they're actually able to track where people are spending their time based on cell phones. Now look at the darker blue line is total time spent outside the home. The initial drop, and then kind of a recovery, and then it's plateaued, and now it's starting to come down again a little bit. Part of that is we're going into wintertime, but part of it is this second wave of the pandemic that's hitting us. People are simply, they're not going out of their house. They're staying at home. Retail, oh, wait a minute, retail and restaurants bounce back up. I think that's mostly retail, but you see it again trending downward. Workplace, 21% below where we were a year ago. Okay, so all these percent changes are based on January of last year. Notice that the workplace, staying away from the workplace, has dropped. It recovered a little bit, and then it's plateaued. That's people that are telecommuting. Those are people that are working from home. Okay, now, if you want to talk about if COVID has had a fundamental change to the economy, I think it's the ability to telecommute. We're starting a new research program right now to look at changes in telecommuting and how this can play out and perhaps be an economic development strategy for a lot of rural communities throughout Wisconsin. Businesses are saying, hey, telecommuting is working, okay? Why do we have these big expensive office spaces if we could have more of our workers telecommute? My son's business, it is it's a company that has a contract with Dish Satellite, and they all went remote work. And the company said, geez, this is working. They canceled their contract. They don't have an office space anymore, okay? Losing that lease cost has really improved the bottom line of the company that my son works with. I think you're going to be seeing more and more and more of that. Okay, this is Sauk County. You can see the same pattern in terms of workplace, retail, and restaurants. I don't know what was going on in August there. I think it might have been just, I'm not sure what's going on in Sauk County. Maybe that's a point of conversation. You see that in the retail and restaurants, there's a gap in the data there, but the same kind of a pattern. Time outside the home, people are staying home. Workplace, people are telecommuting. Okay, and that's again feeding into that divide between the people that can telecommute and the people that can't telecommute. Now, one of the questions, I found this to be a fascinating study. This was done by some folks at the University of Chicago. And what they were looking at is the difference between states that ordered stay-at-home or business closure orders versus states that did not. The idea was to see how much of those stay-at-home business closure orders explained the decline in business activity. Okay, now this particular example, this is the Quad City area down in Illinois and Iowa. Illinois put into place a shutdown order. Iowa did not. So essentially what they did is they looked at business activity on the Illinois side compared to the Iowa side, and they did this across the country. Now, what they found is that, you can see the little bar charts over here, is the decrease in beauty salon visits, let me go back, Okay, and electronic store visits is 2 examples that they used here. Notice that Iowa did not have a stay-at-home or shutdown order, but yet there was a major drop in activity in those 2 sectors. What they walked away here is that it was consumer fear of the pandemic that drove people to stay away from businesses. Specifically, it's the death rate. Okay, as the death rate goes up, people hunker down. They simply do not want to go out. Okay, my wife and I, for example, we love to go out to eat dinner. We have not been out to eat. We've gone out and gotten carry out to try to help support the local businesses and for variety, but we're not going to go into a restaurant until we feel it's safe to go. That kind of attitude is what's driving a lot of this. That's why that spike that occurred in December and is starting to peter away, that's going to have a big impact on what the December and January numbers look like, employment and sales numbers look like, because consumers look at that and they simply say, I'm not going out. Okay. I think this is an important study. So it's not this, the state policy or the local policies of stay at home, it's consumer attitudes. So consumer confidence drives the economy. This is the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. It used to be called the Consumer Confidence Index. You can see it kind of trending upward through 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, kind of trending upwards. Everything's doing well. And then all of a sudden the pandemic hits and it drops off the floor. Okay, until this thing turns around and starts to come back up, the economy is going to continue to kind of struggle a little bit. I think when we look at the December numbers and the January numbers, I think they're going to be down. I think they're going to be down because of the spike in the pandemic. Now, forecast. This is the Wall Street Journal. If you Google Wall Street Journal economic forecast, it will take you to this site. This is essentially kind of looking out into the future. What I've got highlighted there is essentially what we know. We know that the Q2, the gross domestic product took a nosedive, and we saw a massive rebound in Q3. Essentially, we went into shutdown when the pandemic first hit. Then we learned how to live with it, and we came back. Now, where's this going to be going? What they do is they survey about 60 economists, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you what the average across those 60s are looking at. So what I did is you can see the kind of the dot there. That's the average estimated forecast. Then I took the average and I added 1 standard deviation, that's the top of the bar, and then subtracted 1 standard deviation to kind of give you a range of what economists think the economy is going to be looking like. Notice one of the things here that I find that's really very surprising is notice how big that bar is for fourth quarter 2020. Okay, and notice how as you go out into time, that bar gets smaller and smaller. That's highly unusual. Usually it's the other way around. The farther into the future you go, the more uncertain you are, okay? Because more things can happen. You know, if I'm trying to forecast what I think the economy is going to do next quarter, I can have a pretty good idea. If you ask me what it's going to be 2 years from now, there's more noise, there's more uncertainty, okay? I think that the reason that you see such a big confidence interval, and it's not technically a confidence interval, but a big range there, is because there's so much uncertainty about what is happening right now, okay? Now, as the vaccine gets rolled out, I think that we're going to start to see a bit of a rebound. Notice that Q1, that's the quarter that we're in right now, forecasting very slow growth. That's the last massive wave that we went into is going to really put a brakes on the economy, okay? And then we're going to see a rebound, and then we'll get back to kind of more of a normal growth rate of around 3%, okay? The unemployment rate, notice how the confidence intervals, that the size of that bar there around each average gets bigger as you go further out. That makes more sense to me, okay? They expect that the unemployment rate is going to be around between 6.5% and 7%. in December. I think it's going to be a little bit higher than that because of the spike in the infection rate and the death rate. And then it's going to start to come back down again. Okay. Inflation rate is going to be low. People aren't spending money. They're staying home. Okay. Because consumers are not spending money, there's no pressure on prices. Now, notice that it's going to spike up in June. That's because there's going to be pent-up demand. Once the pandemic is over, the vaccines weave their way out, a lot of folks are going to go out and they're going to start spending money. And that's going to put upward pressure on prices. And then we'll see it kind of stabilize between 2% and 2.4%, which is historically about what we've been having. Interest rates, I've been doing this workshop for over 10 years, and every time I say interest rates are going to go up. Okay. They are so low right now, they can't stay this low. Okay. If inflation spikes, there's probably going to be an uptick in interest rates in order to kind of counteract that spike in inflation. But again, as I've said, we've been forecasting rising interest rates for years, and they haven't really gone very far. Okay. Now, what's the probability of a recession in the next 12 months? About a 23% average. This is kind of odd because it's an odd question because we're in the middle of a recession right now. But I think that the consensus here is that 12 months from now, we won't be in a recession. We'll be out of a recession. Okay. Now, this is a question. One of the questions that they ask is the vaccine. What is the impact of the vaccines going to have? I think that the walkaway here is that it's not going to be this time period right now, because that last wave is still kind of working its way through the economy. It's probably going to be the second quarter, which is kind of spring, that we'll start to see people feel more comfortable going out. They've gotten their vaccines. More people are getting their vaccines, and they're starting to feel a little bit comfortable. I think my 2 cents here is that the slow rollout of the vaccine is going to delay this. I think it's going to be more likely Q3 going into the summer, and perhaps the end of summer when we really start to see people feel much more comfortable in getting out. Okay, so some conclusions. There were no red flags about the weakness of the economy pre-COVID. Okay, there were no kind of warning flags saying we're going to go into a recession and this is why. So the pandemic outbreak created significant uncertainty. It kind of caused a bit of a panic. Okay, that's why we had that kind of drop off. Okay, we learned how to live with COVID, and the economy started to rebound. But the problem is that we got sloppy. Okay, and a second wave is unraveling any recovery. Okay, I think the December numbers and the January numbers and probably the February numbers are not going to look good, and it's because of that second wave. Okay, the large difference in who's being impacted the most by the economic downturn is by industry and occupation. The working poor are being disproportionately impacted. Is because the industries that the working poor tend to be in, those are the ones that are getting hit the hardest. 2 things to think about come this summer. Many small businesses that will be forced to close. They cannot ride out the economic downturn any longer. Okay, how can we help these businesses rebuild when the pandemic is over? Okay, a lot of these businesses are kind of, they're trying to keep their employees online. They're suffering because revenues are down, but they're trying to keep their employees online. And a lot of those businesses are simply, we can't do it any longer. We have to shut down. Now, the question is, how can we help them come back when the pandemic is over? The second is telecommuting. I think is something that is going to be more of a structural change coming out of COVID. I think more and more people and more businesses are realizing that expensive office space is an unnecessary cost. Now, this means that a lot of workers are going to be more footloose. They're going to be looking for high amenity areas that are close to urban centers. I think that Sauk Prairie, because it's the closest in terms of Sauk County, it's the closest to the Madison metro area, is particularly primed, but as is the larger Sauk County region. I think you're going to be seeing more and more folks that are kind of looking at, geez, housing is really expensive in Madison. I can move into this really pretty area, get more house for my money, okay, and I can telecommute. But yet I'm close enough to my workplace that I can actually drive in to work when I need to, okay? A key here is access to broadband. Okay, so the opening comments about investments in broadband, I think is going to be something that is going to we're going to have to be thinking about again and again and again, particularly in those high amenity areas that a lot of these people are going to be wanting to look at. So I'll stop with that. And I was not checking the, I'll stop my share now. I was not checking the chats. So if there's any questions, I would love to address them or
We had one question, and it was regarding a slide you showed, and you talked about our mobile devices tracking us. And so the question
yes.
was, when you say they are tracking us, who are you referring to?
Oh, there's a particular company. Um, and if you, it's actually at the bottom of the slide, it's really tiny print. I'd have to look at a deal specifically, but it's a particular company that tracks this data. I think they're drawing a lot of their data from, well, it depends on which kind of company, which, you know, what's your cell service. But essentially I shouldn't say they're tracking. I tend to turn my GPS off when I don't want it because I don't want them watching me. But I mean, you could get a little paranoid if you want to with that. But what they are doing is, it's on the one hand, I really don't want my service provider to know where I'm at. But at the same time, it's a wonderful source of data to analyze. So it's not the federal government. It's not NASA, or the NSA, it's not them, it's not the FBI, it's your service providers.
Yeah, and I'm just looking now, and it says data is from Google COVID Community Mobility Report, so it'd be
Yes.
Google. So I know we have a bunch of other questions right now, but if we can save these for our breakout group, and then we can talk about these in the breakout group, and then we'll come back as a whole group in about a half hour, and then we can open up the discussion. First, we'll start with the moderators, kind of just reporting out on each group, and if we have any time left, we can open it up and answer any of the questions. And just a follow-up, I mean, any questions that aren't answered today, we can definitely follow up in the future if time doesn't allow that for today. So for right now, let's hope these.
Jared,
Yes.
can I ask one thing before we break out? I think
Yes.
the question about the prediction on minimum wage increase and how that will impact business may be a good one to ask Dr. Deller before we go into the breakout.
That's fine.
I'm a mixed opinion on the minimum wage. I think for places like a Chicago, a Madison, a San Francisco, it's not going to have any impact whatsoever because they're already paying that. I think if you get into more rural areas, I think it's going to have a disproportionate impact because a lot of those rural businesses, small businesses, they can't afford to pay that. Now, as a community, there's two things that are going to happen here. One, as a community, do you want businesses that can't afford to pay a quote unquote living wage? Do you want those kind of businesses in your community? That's one question. The second question is a lot of businesses can get around this very easily by moving towards contracting. So you're no longer my paid employee, you're a contractor. And you see that in the construction industry a lot. So there's a very easy walk around on this stuff. But you know, there's one size fits all type of policy. Those always make me really nervous. But on the one hand, this notion of the working poor is that I work 40 hours a week and I'm still eligible for SNAP benefits. And there's something not quite right with that. So it's kind of a yin yang type question. I don't know if I sufficiently skated that answer or not.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we will now go to the breakout rooms. If for some reason it doesn't work for you and you want to just send me a private message, we can try to get that worked out. But it looks like for the majority of us, we are all assigned. So I'm going to open these up. And like I said, the moderators will introduce everybody just for time's sake. We have a half hour for this portion, and then we will all meet back after that.
Jared?
Yes.
Jared, right before we go, I just wanted to draw attention to Nicole Markline from Cross Jinx Mercer Maffei, who does a lot with employee law. She commented in the chat room and just stated that you really want to be careful turning employees into contract employees as there's major legal ramifications. So while it makes sense from a business standpoint, you would want to look at the legal ramifications of that.
Also, it has implication on things like if you offer benefits to your employees, like health insurance or a retirement plan. If you shift from a paid employee to a contractor, what ramifications does that have? So I kind of throw it out there as, this is going to happen, but it's a lot of times we talk in things in terms of black and white, but it's not black and white, it's shades of gray.
Jared, before you dump us into these sessions, I noticed that Crystal Lautenbach is from the Bank of Prairie, and she's in my education group.
Mhm.
So if she's on and she ends up in my group, you may need to pull her out if you could.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to hang out with the education crowd.
All right. Yeah, and some groups weren't. We couldn't break them out.
Believe it or not, she requested to
There
be
you go.
with you and that group. So
Well,
she
we are honored to have her.
Must be the moderator. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So let's try this, and then we'll come back and we'll have plenty of time to kind of discuss what was talked about in all these groups. All right. Thanks, guys. If you could just give, there we go. So I'm not sure if everybody is here yet. I see a lot of like gray screens. So we'll just give this one minute.
The technology is wonderful when it works. When it doesn't work, it's all panic.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. We're teaching classes online. My wife is teaching remotely.
Yeah.
And I could hear some cuss words coming out of the kitchen while she was.
Oh, I can imagine.
You know.
It's definitely an interesting change. I don't, I mean, you see it all the time, right? We're almost a year into this and people still talk with the mute on. So
Yeah, well, it's
that's the simplest one.
yeah. But when we went online, the UW-Madison went online at the end of last spring, I shifted over and, I kind of used the phrase, be patient with me because you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And it was amazing how the students would just say, oh, here, just click on that. Click, oh, it works.
Yeah. It's,
so the technology doesn't face them.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm still pretty young too, and it's way over my head. So
But not afraid to experiment with it.
Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
see, it says everybody's here. I just want to check somebody that has a gray screen. Let's see who we have. Art, are you able to hear and see us? Art Schrader? Or Roxy or Kevin Ravenscroft. Can you guys hear or see us? You're on mute.
I can hear you.
Oh, awesome. Perfect. Yeah. So, well, let's just get into this because we only have so much time. Just a real quick introduction. Jared Pincus, I'm the Community Development Coordinator for Sauk County. My background is urban planning and community development. I have an interest in real estate, so I'm glad I got to join this group. Housing and real estate's been a hot issue for every community for all, I mean, a long time, right? And it's no different in Sauk County. We've worked with SCDC on a housing study a few years back. As Dr. Deller mentioned, he's working on some housing studies here as well. And so with the pandemic coming about, it will be interesting to see or hear your guys' perspective on kind of where the focus has shifted, where the pinch points, and kind of what we can do as a county, as a community with our chambers, even state resources to really help kind of support these industries. So just want to do a quick introduction, and I know not everybody is here, but we have Debbie Smith from WCCU. We have Art Schrader, also WCCU. Let me move my screen here so I can see everybody. Rebecca Jennings from Westby Co-op Credit Union, Dr. Deller. We have Jamie Pfeffles from Remax Grand, Donna Donna Slaney from Bank of Prairie du Sac, Roxy Meyer from Bank of Prairie du Sac, and we also have Kevin Ravenscroft from the People's Community Bank. And so, as we mentioned, there are kind of two canned questions just to start the conversation going. And then from there, just really open it up into a broader discussion of kind of what you are all seeing. So I'll let the first question go, which is, does the information provided today by Dr. Deller reflect what your businesses have experienced in the past year? Or do you feel your business has fared better or worse, and why?
Please tell me I got everything wrong. Explain to me why I got everything wrong.
Well, just generally, I would say that everything you had presented is pretty much spot on. I mean, as far as the real estate industry, obviously it's been a great year in 2020. Sometimes it's hard to say that to those that obviously haven't experienced the same thing in the past year as far as their different industries and things like that. But overall, the pent-up demand with housing, low interest rates, obviously, as everybody else in this chat can attest to, from the banking side of things, interest rates have really drawn people into refinance and to purchase homes as long as those homes are available.
I would tend to agree with that. This is Art Schrader, WCCU. One of the things that I'm seeing is a fatigue and this overwhelming sense that people are waiting for the other shoe to drop, whatever that means. And I think it's taking a toll on people. I know that as far as deposits go and liquidity goes, in my career, I've never seen people this flush with cash. and very little place to deploy it.
I think that's one of the reasons the stock market is doing so well, is because I know personally, my wife and I, we were just looking at our bank account. It's like, oh my God, why are we sitting on so much cash? And it's because we're not going out to eat, we're not traveling, we're not spending it. So we said, okay, let's take some of that money and let's stick it into a supplemental retirement account, which happens to be in the stock market.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of situation we're in. And I think you highlighted this perfectly, Dr. Deller, which was, from my perspective and, outside of Sauk County, I invest in real estate as well. And I've been able to do that because, right, I mean, I have, I'm not an hourly employee, right? I work for the county and, have a professional level job. The concern I have, and maybe if you can all kind of add to this, is as a homeowner, I am allowed to go into forbearance on my mortgage, right? And I can do that and not pay and not really have to worry about my payments if I'm an owner. Now, if I'm a renter, I know there is a moratorium on evictions, and that is being discussed to extend it, I believe, till September. But it doesn't seem like the opportunities are there for renters as well, because you can still be evicted for other issues, right? And so it's an interesting predicament. I mean, like you're talking about the liquidity that some households have versus others, or the options to kind of protect yourselves also seem a little bit split. This time more, owner occupied versus rental. So I don't know, especially with the bankers online, kind of what you're seeing. Are you seeing is there any concern for a wave of foreclosures to come for the renters? Are we seeing any issues in terms of investors of multifamily residential? Kind of what's been going on there?
Well, this is Roxy, and I can speak for our organization. We work with our borrowers as much as possible, and we really aren't seeing any right now that have any concerns that we're aware of, but we obviously are going in this with eyes wide open, knowing that in the next year or two, there might be people that are struggling. I think in Sauk Prairie, we're in a pretty good spot. We haven't, I think sometimes we're sheltered a little bit. We don't always see the hard economic challenges that some other areas do see. And again, we've been pretty lucky that we're not seeing a lot of challenge in our area. There have been a couple that, again, we're concerned about, but they're all seeming to chug along just fine right now. We're looking forward to having the PPP loans again so that we can help anyone that might be struggling. But we'll work with the borrowers as best we can so that we don't see them losing their homes.
Roxy, if I could follow up on that, do you work with or do you have any experience of the landlords and the landlords that are kind of, they have to make their payments to the bank, but yet they may be not getting their rent income? Are any of the landlords kind of between a rock and a hard place?
As far as I know, we do not have any landlords that are in that spot at this point in time. We do have multifamily properties, but I'm not aware of anyone that has a concern at this point.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Roxy, and I would agree. This is Art Schrader. I would agree with that. I do want to add a couple points that Dr. Deller, you may or may not be aware of, but the regulators have been very clear with us that they've given us a tremendous amount of latitude in working with borrowers to do whatever needs to be done, basically, to help get them through this, which is, I think that's, many times in the past, our hands are tied by regulators. That has not been the case this time around. They've been very clear with that.
So that's positive. Did that come out of the CARES Act, or is that just the regulators deciding that they're going to work with the banks?
No, that's just the regulators out of DC saying you need to. Now this is on the credit union side, but I've been told it's the same on the bank side. That they will, you know, you're expected to go out of your way to stretch and make whatever can happen. Here's the rub. Here's the rub on that statement and on my concern is that the longer this carries on, the more things keep getting shoved down the road. Okay. What I mean by that is there's been a lot of deferrals done. The PPP money has been a blessing for a lot of people. A lot of restructuring has been done that we don't have to consider it as a troubled asset at the direction of the regulators. But at some point, the rubber hits the road here, and there's going to be virtually no rope left for these people to hold on to. And you were spot on when you talked about the hospitality, restaurant industries, live entertainment industries. Those are the ones that are, it's a day by day. And I think, you know, because of the PPP and because of some grants and because of the regulators, they've been able to withstand the storm. But so many of them, even if they opened their doors today and gave away tickets, it wouldn't make a difference, and people just aren't going to go.
It wouldn't. And this isn't real estate related, but it goes back to those small businesses that just, you know, they tried to make it through, but they just couldn't make it through, so they shut down. But then this summer or this fall, the market's back open and they can open back up, but they have this black mark on their record that they had to close the business. Is that going to come back and bite them? I don't know. That's a lot of the uncertainty that's kind of weighing on the economy right now.
Right, and I would argue that the new normal has not been defined, and with very few exceptions, most of us aren't able to discern what that will be.
So, I mean, it seems obviously for this group, right? It's much different from retail restaurants, and so, you know, one of the other kind of scripted questions we had is what needs to happen for your business to be successful, and it doesn't necessarily appear that anything needs to change, and especially, I mean, a lot of you are dealing with, you know, state and federal regulation. The county, I don't know what the county could even do, but if we were to kind of reword that question into, you know, in the coming year, what programs can the county, can our chambers, the state provide to either your current customers or new customers? What can we do to address issues of housing? What can we do to, you know, one thing I'm really interested in is what can we do to attract people who live in Dane County to Sauk County, and what are you guys seeing in the past, and possibly how has the pandemic either helped, you know, I guess helped Sauk County position itself to attracting these, whether it's businesses or residents from neighboring communities?
There's a study that was done by Randy Stoker, who's in our rural sociology department, about looking at younger professionals that moved into rural communities and what drove them. And it was, one was affordable quality housing, really good schools, because they tend to be young professionals, really good schools. The second was public safety. They felt as though they could walk their dog at night and feel safe. Cultural things to do, like farmers markets, maybe a coffee shop that does live music every now and then. But those are kind of, and then it drops off. And then it drops off from there. But it's really kind of quality of life. What makes this a really kind of cool place to live? But number one is, I mean, is the quality of the housing. the affordability of the housing and the quality of the housing. As I've worked with a lot of communities around Wisconsin around housing, the housing issues falls into one of two. Well, it's both. It's either it's really expensive for the types of jobs that we have in the community. People that work here can't afford to live here, or the housing's really crappy. That kind of middle ground is where the disconnect is at.
Yeah, and I remember when that study came out because Randy actually came out and presented to the Sauk Prairie Chamber, and so it was really interesting, interesting findings. I think we are in a great position because housing is cheaper than it is in most of Dane County if you're in Sauk. For the most part, I mean, Sauk Prairie's on the higher end. That's, a lot of it is geography and land use, right? It's kind of constrained. But there's opportunities in Baraboo. Reedsburg is doing a phenomenal job with new development. And so there's a lot of affordable housing. As Brent mentioned earlier, there was a new kind of program through the FCC and Sauk County, basically three companies, mostly Reedsburg Utility, but between them and two other internet providers, we'll have another 3,200 households hooked up to 1 gig speed within the next few years. So broadband is a huge issue, and that will be built out. The process and the time is a little challenging, but we are working with understanding the needs of these internet service providers and to see how we can help invest to speed that up. Because you get out to kind of the more rural parts of the county, right? The western parts of the county in particular, Spring Green area, and broadband is a huge issue. So, and that, I mean, that it kind of mixes into with a lot of people working from home. You need reliable internet, and if that's not available in some of our communities, it's just not going to be a place where people are going to live.
Broadband used to be a luxury, but it's not anymore. It's a necessity. You've got to have it. It's not. Yeah.
It really
I mean,
is.
you could invest in good schools, good parks, invest in beautifying your downtown. But if you don't have broadband, 10 years ago, those other strategies just in and of themselves would have worked, but increasingly, we jokingly used to call it the Netflix effect. I got it from a student of mine. When I teach my class, I ask how many students, most of my students come from rural communities, and I ask them how many of them want to go back to their community. And one student said, I had every intention of going back home after I graduated, and that was the Upper Peninsula. And she said, I went home for winter break, and I was planning on streaming a Netflix series that I'm watching, and I can't watch Netflix at home. I'm not returning home after I get my degree. So I jokingly call it the Netflix effect, but it is that generation. It's not just generational. It's what we're doing right now. If you don't have good broadband, you can't participate in something like this.
Yeah, just like you said, it was a luxury at one point. Now it's a necessity. In over 90% of my buyers, that's the first question they ask. Is there high speed? What we used to call high speed, now broadband, is that available? And obviously in the rural areas, like Redstone is covered. Lavelle Telephone Co-op, they've got great service. But anything further north, you're dealing with rural connectivity with CenturyLink and things like that. And there's the big issue with that too is competition. They're not allowed to cross territorial lines, and that's, I think, a huge problem in accessing broadband in the rural areas.
The governor has a broadband task force, and anything that are like regulatory rules like that are creating serious problems, the state should know about it. Because if it's a rule or regulation that is creating the bottleneck, fix the damn rule or regulation. I mean, that's fairly straightforward. If it's more that, it's the company saying it simply doesn't make sense to run cable, a mile out that way for 2 houses.
Yeah, well, where I live up by the Dutch Hollow area. So, I'm very close to the territory line, so to speak, between Laval telephone territory and Central Lake and or Frontier. And I've spoken with them, and they said they can't, even though they've got fiber optics around the corner, probably about half a mile from my house, they can't continue that project because of territory requirements or restrictions. So.
Yeah. Hey, I'd like to ask a question, Dr. Dollar. I get your opinion. This is off topic a little bit. One of the things that that concerns me, and as I think about in the future, is the massive amount of federal spending and debt we've been incurring, and the fact that a lot of this, and with the new president, there will be even greater spending. A lot of this money has not been absorbed into the economy, and I think it'll probably be years before it all is. And I'm curious to know what you feel the long-term implications to the market as a whole, on the stock market, but at the economy as a whole of this spending and debt loads.
I think there's a couple of things. One is that one of the reasons that we started the recovery, we saw the fall, kind of the panic fall, and then the recovery. That recovery started when the CARES Act passed. Okay, so there's the short-term need for the stimulus. Second is that interest rates are incredibly low right now, so it's extremely cheap to incur that debt. Third is the Federal Reserve is financing a lot of that debt. The Federal Reserve is buying a lot of it as part of the stimulus package. So those are all kind of short-term positives that are saying, we can make this work. What scares me is who's buying the debt, who owns the debt. Right now, China and Saudi Arabia are our biggest debt holders. So what scares me long-term strategically is what if Saudi Arabia, I'll pick on Saudi Arabia, what if they suddenly decide we're going to dump all our US securities on the market? That would have devastating impacts on our economy. There's a story about Reagan and the Japanese. The Japanese auto industry wanted to get into the US truck market. Because that's the biggest selling vehicles in the US are trucks, not cars. And the Japanese wanted to get into that market. And the way that they were going about it is that we're going to come in at a really low price. We're going to actually operate at a loss in order to get market share. Well, Detroit screamed bloody murder. Reagan went to Japan and said, "You're dumping. You can't do that. That's against our trade policies." And the Japanese responded and said, "Well, Mr. President, if you do that, we'll have to rethink our position on our US debt holdings." And Reagan backed off. Because if the Japanese suddenly flooded the market with their debt holdings, it would have devastated the economy. That scares me. So the short term, we can make it work, but the long term, we're really exposing ourselves.
Let me ask one follow-up, and I know this sounds almost conspiratorial, and I don't mean it to, but does this push other developed nations to reconsider the dollar being their world reserve currency?
As long as the U.S. economy is stable and growing, the U.S. economy is still going to be the U.S. dollar is still going to be the preferred trade. If we were to go into a prolonged, deep recession while the rest of the world was not, then perhaps there would be a shift. But right now, I don't think that's in a near-term concern. Now, the question is that, part of it is that a lot like the CARES Act, the one that they just recently passed, these are one-time shots of money. Okay, and once that money's spent, there's no more. Okay, so these spikes in the deficit are like one-time spikes. It's almost like World War II. Massive spike in the deficit during World War II, but as soon as the war was over, the need for all that spending disappeared. Okay, so it's not that we're increasing, we're not increasing defense spending, we're not increasing permanent programs and running a deficit to pay for those permanent program increases. These are one-time shocks.
Those are really good questions. I mean, again, I mean, I think those are questions everybody has, is where is this money coming from and how do we get out of it? Because we've heard for so long that, the deficit, I mean, it just keeps going up year and year and year. And I mean, I'm not, I'm in my mid 30s, but I remember 10 years ago, 15 years ago, or we're at $4 trillion and now it's, that's a drop in the bucket. So it's an incredibly relevant question. And it is interesting to know how that could affect us long term. When you've pointed out, Dr. Dell, that short term, I mean, it's necessary, and has it been done correctly? I mean, we can all look back and say, well, this and this might have been better to do, or these people need more money than everybody. Why everybody got a stimulus, I don't know. But again, I mean, right, what you've already shown through your presentation was that here's what has happened because of that in the short term. And it's likely, again, I mean, that we'll probably need more in the future. We all thought 2021 was going to be better than 2020, but we're still kind of sitting here waiting for those changes to happen. We've only got about 30 seconds left remaining. As I mentioned, at the kind of the beginning of this presentation, the idea is to have these focus groups meet on kind of regular basis, once every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, to continue these conversations going. We had a number of breakout groups kind of pre-identified before the meeting, and this wasn't one of them. But it's a great group and it's really interesting. I'm just wondering, with 5 seconds here, is this something you guys would be willing or interested in continuing? And maybe we can follow up after, since the time is up. Well, it looks like we're all kind of getting back here. My biggest concern today was technology, and it seems like it worked. So I'll take this as a win. So what we plan to do with the rest of the time, we have just over a half hour or so. If each moderator wants to kind of report out some highlights, some questions asked, maybe there's some questions to still be answered. And Julie, you are at the top of my screen, so I'm going to call on you first.
Make sure I unmute myself, right, Jared? I had the lodging and tourism group. A lot of what I'm hearing is, I think, what we all expect to hear from the lodging tourism group is that we need tourism to start again in order for these businesses to flourish and to see their businesses start to boom again. A lot of, I think, what we're hearing is location of where the items, of where their businesses are, what kind of cleaning policy they have set up, making sure that there's things to do that are safely in the community, and also just meeting guest expectations. So that's a huge. COVID, as Dr. Weller said, that it's huge on this industry, and I didn't expect to hear anything different from my participants. Everything I heard was quite expected. So there was a few questions still raised about the minimum wage. Also questions about the PPP loans, things like that. So I'm assuming that we can send like a some sort of follow-up paperwork with some of the questions that we can't get answered during. Okay, that's what I thought. Okay. Not quite sure what else you want me to cover, but they basically say that we need to be creative in creating events so that people feel safe and people travel and people move around and then spend money. I mean, that's basically what we're looking at. So, but like I said, I didn't hear anything different than what I have expected to hear or what I have been hearing since March. So.
Thanks, Julie.
You're welcome.
I will just jump in next. So the group I was in was banking and real estate, and Dr. Deller was in, I'm very grateful he was in my group as well. So it was a really great conversation. Some of the kind of couple questions, right? So, does the information provided today reflect what the business has been experiencing? And we got spot on. The industry in itself, real estate and banking, hasn't seemed to have been impacted necessarily. What we learned is that bankers are willing to work with the borrowers. There haven't really been any huge issues as of now. We have a really strong community. Landlords, because we talked about the difference of owner occupied versus renter occupied. No real knowledge of landlords running into major concerns, which is really great. And we were told that regulators have been very clear. There's tremendous latitude to work with borrowers to do what is needed to support their customers. And that the new normal has not been defined. We talked about what could be done in the coming year to not necessarily support the industry, since a lot of state federal regulations already exist, and that industry of banking and real estate hasn't necessarily been hit as hard as, or not at all, compared to what Julie just reported out. So we kind of talked about what the county could do, what our chambers could do, and even how some of our state partners could help support new development, attracting new residents, new businesses. And kind of the list that came out was, affordable housing, good schools, public safety, as Julie mentioned, cultural events and activities. That's a tough one. And then we really spent a bit of time talking about broadband. That's not a luxury, but a necessity. We were told that 90% of buyers ask if broadband is available. So as I mentioned, as Brent mentioned earlier, there was a new broadband initiative launched earlier this year, and between Reedsburg Utility and a few other internet service providers, we'll have another 3,200 households connected with gig speed internet in the next few years. So at the county level, we're trying to identify really strategic opportunities to help expedite that development and identify ways in which we can potentially help direct where that goes based on what we see from community need, from development spending, just to really get up to speed as quickly as possible. It's a massive undertaking, but it's been discussed for many, many years, and we have in the past worked hard to help support broadband, and we continue to do so. One of the other really interesting questions asked was about debt, short-term and long-term, and what does that mean? At the short term, and Dr. Deller kind of, spoke about this during his presentation and alluded to it. The recovery really started when the CARES Act was passed. In the short term, it's needed, and there's been a few different variations of that, and assume there will be more in the future. Right now, interest rates are incredibly low, so it's cheaper to incur debt. The Federal Reserve is financing a lot of that debt. The long-term issue that, and Dr. Dell, you can add to this if you want, but longer term issue that provided some kind of, I don't want to say fear, which was who owns the debt. China and Saudi Arabia are the biggest debt holders. So long term, the questions are, what if one of those countries decided to dump all the securities on the market, and that would be devastating to our economy. But again, in the short term, it's needed, it's helped, and right now, because of interest rates, it has been low. And again, I mean, this is deficit. These are one-time kind of spending issues. These aren't permanent programs that are being put in place. So I will now pass it to Jeff Westra from WDB. We can go to Tawana.
Oh, I'm good. I'm sorry. I just had to move a little something on my screen. I wanted to pull up local area unemployment statistics for everyone. I just put them in the chat. Our group had a really good discussion. I was with the manufacturing group. They wanted to make sure that one message came clear, and that was that even throughout the pandemic, with the exclusion of the initial blip, that manufacturing jobs were really fairly safe, and that employment remained strong in that industry. Most had a little bit of a downturn at the initial onset of the pandemic, but had a steep increase in business as we were coming out of it through the summer. So the biggest issue for them seems to be that employees are hard to find. And then there's a lot of efforts afoot to attract and retain talent. So the emphasis being on retaining and doing different things and being creative in order to do that. So another part of it was changes due to the pandemic with virtual interviewing and phone interviewing will probably remain because there's an efficiency that was gained through that. So post-pandemic, that'll be a process that they felt comfortable that would be retained. And then another part of it was telecommuting for work. So they've got a number of people that are working out of Madison as well as around Sauk County. But the ability to telecommute has been beneficial and kind of a silver lining in how their groups work together. PPP was a huge benefit to offset some expenses, help pay for personal protective equipment, changes with facilities to help make them safer for employees to feel safe in their roles and get people back to work. There's a need for, as well as manufacturers, more people in truck driving positions as well as logistics. I think that about covers it. They didn't feel that the minimum wage increase would be that significant to them because most are already paying above. With an exclusion of one of the participants, they felt that that wouldn't be a huge impact. Gang, I hope I did you proud, and there's my report out.
Thank you. Tim, Chairman McCumber. You're on mute.
I tapped it, it just didn't work. Thank you, Jared. I know a lot of you folks, but some of you don't know me. I'm Tim McCumber. I'm the new county chair. It's almost been a year, I guess, but getting my feet wet. I had the education group, and I thought it was really excellent conversation. And the one thing that we talked about is, they agreed wholeheartedly with what, Dr. Deller was talking about what we were seeing in impacts across the board. And of course, from an education standpoint, those unemployment sectors affect, what's going on in the schools. And one of the things, like with MATC in particular, they were seeing an uptick of interest in people in those hospitality and tourism industries looking to get some new education, some retraining, but not as much as they thought. And a lot of it came down to the same challenges everybody else is experiencing with how do they balance the childcare situation, or they had people that were, when they could get the work, they were picking up the extra hours so that they could, make up for the loss of income elsewhere. So they were dealing with a lot of those challenges. And then, of course, we talked in general about the schools and things that are going on. And there's all of the challenges of what's coming up with, you know, some of the testing for kids to get into college and how that atmosphere is changing and how they're changing some of the exams. And I think if I recall, there was even the comment, some of the exams are look at even dropping SATs and ACTs as part of the entrance process. So we're seeing a big change there. And ultimately, Jared, I'll be probably pounding on you with this information too. Again, it got down to, you know, the hotspots and internet connectivity. You know, it's one of the comments was just a mile north of Spring Green. You know, they have students that can't get online. So that's going to be a big part of it. And then that also flexed into the conversation about not everybody's thriving in this virtual learning environment. And, you know, the issues that we, you know, some kids are doing really well. It's a great tool for them. Other kids are struggling. You know, I think one of the statistics was there were some classes, not necessarily in our region, where there was as many as 40% of the kids were failing because they're not doing well in this virtual world. So it's going to be a mixed bag, was kind of the takeaway from an education standpoint about how the schools are going to move forward. And it could be a combination of there's some new opportunities in having different avenues to work with some of the kids that maybe don't do as well in the classroom versus getting those other kids back in the school. So I think those were some of the challenges and things we talked about. And I'm sure if somebody thinks I was wrong about that takeaway, they can put it in the chat.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it. Darren?
All right, so we were the retail group and we had some great conversation. It really was apparent that, you know, the kind of the vast amount of different types of retail were affected differently. We had several in the group that were in the arts, and some of them had online retail presence or shifted to that. And that really kind of was a saving grace, but still seeing numbers obviously down from where they would be. And then some of the more traditional retail experienced better years or maintained their level simply because of discretionary income that was available for retail shopping that wasn't being spent in those other sectors as it traditionally is with travel and dining out and some of those areas. So that being said, we looked at the arts in retail and the need for those events to return, such as like fairs on the square and those type of events, those art fairs, those retail outlets for artisans, being such a major concern for a lot of small businesses. So working on a county level and community level to make sure that those that we can get those back and get those up and running as quickly as possible. Also, we talked a little bit about some of the topics that could be helpful going forward for our retail group, which I won't go on and on about all of that, but like starting an e-commerce site. So that's something that maybe the chambers can work together to present. So maybe it's the topic during our roundtable. For an education piece on starting e-commerce, and then some other topics on just some education needed as we transition from a traditional shopping environment into kind of an electronic age of shopping. How do we optimize search engines when people are looking for us? How do we post an e-commerce site? All of those type things are going to be extremely important in the retail environment as they continue to move through the remainder of the pandemic and into recovery. So those were some of the big things that we had discussed. The tools, basically tools for the future. And then also the broadband obviously came up in ours as well as one of the main topics that they would like to see the county, county and the chambers focus on is the need for that across the board. And we discussed the fact that not just for their retail businesses, but for the schools, for students, you know, how big of an issue that is across the board. And I think that kind of sums up what we kind of had discussed. You know, there were some questions about PPP and, you know, in the bigger group. And I know that SCDC is doing a call this afternoon on PPP. So I'm sure that we can get some of the answers from that. But retail in general, while there were some declines across the board, was I think, a more straight line than some of the other industries had seen.
Thanks, Darren. That was really helpful. Now we'll move it to Jason Scott from WEDC.
Thanks, Sharon. So I worked with was the moderator for the local government group. So obviously the industry is a little bit different, and some of the impacts to a community are kind of mirror a lot of what you said as the individual industries. There were concerns about you could look in the downtowns and in the business parks and see the empty parking lots. You knew how they were being affected by the lack of foot traffic, which represented some businesses closing. One community had incubator space that is, you know, they were traditionally growing, getting new businesses, you know, graduating businesses, but they this year was the downturn. They lost the existing businesses. They're struggling as an incubator. A lot of the discussion took place is about the opportunities moving forward and sort of the challenges of moving forward. How do you, what is the demand for office space moving forward? What investments that have been made into business parks are going to struggle if those business parks are not as valuable as they were in the past, and businesses and office space does not grow. If we can take advantage of the telecommuting, we certainly think that Sauk County is in a position, just due to its natural amenities, the community types of communities, that there is certainly a potential to take advantage of telecommuting. Specific reference was made about the importance of the tourism, gathering people. Again, I guess it's related to the amenities, but the bike trail, making those connections could play an important role for a lot of the communities. If the communities are able to successfully attract those who have opportunities to move that didn't, is there enough housing stock in the communities? There are certain communities that already have pretty high price points now for their existing real estate. And if that demand starts to grow, those affordable housing is going to be missing. Secondly, as communities grow, as much as we want to attract the new telecommuters, how does it affect the community as a whole, its character, its the growth, and any growth needs to be well planned. I think it was the message that people live there for a certain reason, don't lose the characteristics of what makes the community a desirable place to begin with due to the growth that might occur due to telecommuting. I think through there's a recognition that there's going to be a lot of the opportunities may depend exactly on the infrastructure. So as everybody has mentioned, broadband availability, regardless of the natural amenities that a community might have, if telecommuting is not an option, then through the broadband, I think you've lost a lot of opportunities. So affordable cell phones, even cell phone service is not always reliable. And to get the technology up to date at an affordable rate is pretty important for these communities as well. I think that's all I can think of as part of our discussion.
Thank you. That was a really great rundown. It's really interesting how every single group basically has mentioned broadband as the biggest issue. And you know, I think it was mentioned in our group by Dr. Deller. I mean, what we're doing now, right, requires broadband. It's education, it's healthcare, right? if you can't necessarily go to doctor's appointments, it's telehealth, education. So it's all encompassing. So I appreciate that. That was a real great rundown. Ed White, I saw you posted your meeting. Do you just want to follow up and then you can give a plug for your meeting later today as well, since Darren also already mentioned it?
Yep. I put that there because Darren did mention it. So that's in the chat, in the chat box if you want to join us at 2 o'clock, be an hour session. So our group was pretty much the healthcare, insurance, legal group. And this group, although they didn't, insurance and legal really didn't see a whole lot of economic impact necessarily. They did see a whole lot of operational impact. Once again, broadband, it's the ability to do things remotely. Nicole had talked about it being fascinating. Their practice did stop. The family law part of it stopped because under family law, everything had to be in person, right? And they shut down the courts. And so there was a quick, immediate effect. But since then, the fascinating part is they've adapted, right? And now things are easier than they were before, right? It's easier to get in front of these courts than it had been. So, and they were able to hire 2 attorneys, once again through the PPP, and we're working remotely. An example she gave is they've hired an attorney now in Milwaukee who telecommutes while his wife is finishing school. And so wouldn't have happened prior to COVID, right? And so so those kind of things, the healthcare, obviously, as Dr. Deller pointed out, a lot of things just shut down, clinics and procedures. And what we saw was one of our partners was, the Rural Hospital Cooperative, and they do things statewide, right? And a lot of its education was affected greatly. 40% of their staff are clinical staff, and those things were pretty much closed down. And so the PPP was helpful to them to keep those people employed until things started coming back. And then, once again, the technology allowed them to do some education, not as well as before, but still pretty well. Mental health is booming. Not a great thing, but it is booming. A lot of issues, around, as was mentioned a little earlier. One of our people has almost doubled their staff in the clinicians. Once again, PPP allowed them to maintain staff and do that while certain things were closed down. One of the things that really popped up was adapting. So in the mental health area, the coding for insurance, example, televisits were different than in-person visits. Phone visits weren't covered at all. And so getting the industry, the insurance industry, the providers and the payers to adapt to saying this is the way things are going to have to be in the future. And so a good thing coming out of it is those things have now changed, and they're catching up, and providers are being paid to provide virtually what they used to do in person. So there are some good things coming out of this. One of our insurance providers talked about their agents becoming advisors, especially along the employee benefit area. A lot of their clients were asking about how does this all affect their employee benefits. And so a much bigger impact, instead of selling, they're advising, their clients, and that was a change. And so, okay, hospice was another one, obviously, home care, and more importantly, a lot of their clients are in nursing homes and skilled nursing facilities, which basically didn't close down, but didn't allow visitors. And so that really affected their business, but have adapted, and things, are getting better. Hopefully that will be an area that opens up soon, for visitation. What do we do going forward? I talked about the PPP being a game changer. I know Carrie Apple, there are some unintended consequences about expenses not being deductible. If you got the PPP and paid it, then now you can't deduct your expenses in Wisconsin. So things weren't all glory and roses on the PPP, but it did keep a lot of, as we've heard this morning, a lot of our businesses in business. And so warts and all, it was still a very good program. Almost every person in my room talked about the PPP program being of great benefit. Housing, I think somebody else had mentioned it earlier, but as Dr. Deller talked about, Sauk County being a sort of a magnet maybe for those moving out of urban areas, but you got to have some place for them to live. And so it just reiterated that housing is, critical housing options from apartments to single family to condos to, it's not just one type of housing. And so that's something SCDC is working on as we go along. And selling our communities, right, is the marketing of this being a great place to live. And when we get the broadband straightened out, that's an extra arrow in the quiver. I think that's about it on our side.
Thanks, Ed. And just last group to report was Tawana, and you had professional services, I believe, right?
Yes, I did. And we had a very diverse group, everything from banking, CPA, to construction, to nonprofit. One of the things that I want to make sure that we request from everyone attending, our initial thought moving forward with the industry roundtables, the key would be on industry. And it was very clear in my professional services group, they love and need the diversity of different voices. So they're recommending we drop the idea of industry and just do roundtables and then give people options for the time of day that works best for them. And so if you agree or disagree with that, can you just put it in the comment section so we can capture your voice on your preference? Another idea was maybe do it by the size of companies, employee numbers, but then a one-person shop really gets creative and value from being with people with larger. So just share your thoughts on that so we can capture. I guess the one thing I will say, it is unanimous and you have our commitment to work on broadband in the county. I know for Sauk Prairie, about 72% of our families have access to strong broadband, but we've still got a third without it. And so I'm challenged to walk away from this and make sure that at the county level, we're identifying every possible resource. Jeff and Jason be thinking of funding sources to help us here, and we'll make that happen. The question that we had, I guess, because I don't want to reiterate what has already been said, but there was real concern, Dr. Deller, for our manufacturing businesses and our real estate industry, that they've not been hit as hard, but do you anticipate that there is going to be a second whip of the tail, so to speak, that these industries may impact that? And then what can we do? Business retention in every single industry is having a hard time recruiting business or employees. So any ideas you have from a economic standpoint on what should the county be looking at, or are there resources we're not aware of to try to keep the employees we have, recruit others? And the last thing that they were concerned about was the empty buildings. And perhaps we could get creative with some of the housing needs to look at, if we're gonna have these large buildings sitting empty, does it make sense to work creatively on how we reuse some of those businesses? And Dr. Deller, I'll turn it over to you for your thoughts.
I don't think manufacturing is exposed. I think that the manufacturing that was exposed was where you couldn't do social distancing in the production line. We saw that a lot in food processing, because you're kind of working shoulder to shoulder. Those industries had a hard time adapting. I don't think there's going to be a problem with manufacturing. What What was the next question? Because you had several.
Yep, real estate, your
Real
thoughts
estate.
on that moving forward.
I think that, and this is something that we'll be working on for the Sauk Prairie area next week. I think we start a little bit more focused. I think there's a range of things. I think that affordability, those kind of starter homes, those middle price starter homes is where the gap is really at. And we know that. The question is, what do we do about it? I know the construction industry is that if you've got a contractor and the choice is to build 2 quote unquote starter homes or 1 high-end home, all the incentives are to build the high-end home. They can make a lot more money doing that. So how can the community address that? I think the other thing is the rental market. One of the things that we're finding, again, as we look at housing around the state, it's not so much home ownership, it's the rental market that is really, really stressed. And this is where a lot of communities struggle because they have this idea of what housing should be. Housing should be on a half-acre lot, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a 2-car garage. And that's too narrow. We need to broaden out our thinking in terms of what housing should be. And that's going to vary from community to community. But we have to get away from this idea of a half-acre lot, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and 2.3 kids. Because that's not, that's not where the stress is occurring. I think that hopefully we'll come up with some solid ideas out of those workshops that we're doing for Sauk Prairie, and maybe some of those ideas can filter into some of the other community discussions. You had another question too.
Yep, the last one for you, as we look at empty buildings in community, do you anticipate, like from an economic standpoint, attracting more large businesses to fill, or do we have to get creative on how to reuse those buildings?
I think reusing those buildings. I think it's going to depend on the building itself. There was an urban renewal initiative that started in Chicago, and it was the south of the Loop. If you can picture Chicago in your head, south of the Loop, there were all these old warehouse buildings. And some developer came in and basically said, I think they'd make great condos. And they converted them into condos. And the stars just aligned and it worked. The reason it worked is because they were cool old buildings. Okay, so if you've got some old buildings that could be renovated into different types of uses, yes. If it's just a, it depends on the building. But I think that for housing, you got to start thinking outside the box. You got to move beyond half-acre lot, You got to move beyond that, particularly for starter homes. For that young professional couple that works in Madison, they decide that they can telecommute 3 days a week. Sauk County is within commuting distance, and they can get a lot more house, but they're not ready for that. They want a starter home, and increasingly that's a duplex or something different. So it's being creative. It's thinking. It's moving beyond our traditional image of what I would want to buy may not be what young families that are looking at moving into the area are looking at. The other thing is marketing and recruitment. I think we should change and try to market to people and not try to market and recruit businesses. It used to be that people follow businesses, people follow jobs. That's changing. Increasingly, it's jobs follow people. So the switch on the marketing and the recruitment really is more aiming at people and less so businesses. It's a subtle mindset shift. So it's like we're investing in schools not to produce good labor for businesses. We're investing in schools because when people look at neighborhoods, they look at communities, they say, do I want to send my kid there? And that's what they're thinking. The fact that they produce good students that turn into good workers is good, but that's not, it's shifting the way that we think about things a little bit. And these little things like arts on the square, farmers market on the square, it's really difficult as an economist to connect that those generate jobs. It's really hard to make that connection. But when you see it, you kind of see that these types of things make for a vibrant community, make for a community that people want to live in. So it's a lot of times I get, well, what's the economic impact of a farmer's market? Well, really hard to say. But what I can say is that people prefer to live here because there is a vibrant farmer's market.
Can I just ask one more question, Dr. Deller? It came up in our group was the minimum wage. Would that be across the board minimum wage that they're looking at?
Yeah.
Or are they looking at doing something different with some of the businesses that work on tips, like restaurants and bars?
Oh,
Do you
that
know?
I don't know. But all the proposals that I'm hearing is across the board, federal minimum wage would be $15 an hour. And as someone mentioned in the report back, for a lot of businesses, it's like that doesn't matter because we're already paying above that. Madison, so what? Chicago, so what? San Francisco, so what? But when you get into some of these smaller rural areas, some of these small businesses, that can be a real problem. Now that comment about, we'll just shift to contracting, someone raised the question that it's not that simple. And I would like, I think Erica maybe brought that up. I would love to find out more about that.
And it's not that simple. And Julie, I think the blurb I saw on a federal level was that they would get rid of the restaurant $2.35 an hour. It would be 15 across the board there would be no more sub exemption. But, that's proposed. Whether that ever goes anywhere,
Yeah.
we're a long ways from there yet.
But it's a cultural difference. I mean, how many folks have been to Europe and been out to eat, gone to a restaurant on a trip to Europe? Do you leave a tip? You do leave a tip, and you stand out like a sore thumb because they paid their wait staff a good wage. You don't have to tip them. So it's kind of a cultural shift. So rather than tipping, it's just embedded into the price of the meal.
I see we have a couple other questions, but just out of respect for everybody's time, if you want to email either myself, one of the chamber directors, or Ed, any of these questions, we can always report back out. We're just a few minutes over. So with that, first off, a special thanks to Dr. Dell for a great presentation, taking the time out of his day. He presents this annually in Sauk Prairie, but to do this for Sauk County, it's a very special treat. So we are very appreciative for that. Also, our chamber directors who have been incredibly helpful in organizing this, developing the ideas, working with the county as a whole over the last about year. We couldn't have done this without you guys. So thank you for that. Our state partners from the WDB, Jeff Westra, and Jason Scott from WEDC, also incredibly helpful. Ed White from SEDC, and also another special, acknowledgement or thank you to the Bank of Prairie du Sac for helping to put on this event. So with that, again, thanks to everybody that attended and participated. We will be reaching back out with you and setting up those roundtable discussions to keep the conversations going. That will help to kind of inform us at the local level and potentially state level to see what programs are out there to support our communities and what kind of needs to be done to fill in those gaps. So with that, thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you, Jared.
Thanks,
Thank
Jared.
you, Jared.
Thanks, everyone.